Through the depths, through darkness, we ascend. Fountainhead Palace in Sekiro is a revelation when you first see it. The lands of Ashina are pockmarked by the scars of war, snowy vistas trod by soldiers who are running low on everything from patience to simple resources like salt. The wolf seeks high and low, first for his Lord Kuro, then for the ingredients to a spell that will sever the plague of corrupted immortality blighting war-torn Japan. And while there is a certain beauty to Senpou Temple, it's more of a natural splendor that would not be out of place in real Japan. But after delving the depths of Ashina and finding yourself in a forsaken village where even the light of the sun is a far distant memory, you emerge in a place so stunning in its grandeur, such a stark contrast to what came before, that it feels downright otherworldly. Welcome to Fountainhead Palace. In that way, the closest comparison I can come up with in the FromSoft continuum to Fountainhead Palace is the Ringed City from Dark Souls 3. A lot of Dark Souls 3 is murky, grim, decayed, and all around worn down. And if I can sidestep for a moment, I do like this. I've seen a lot of criticism about Dark Souls 3 being overly grey, and all I can say is that DS3 takes place in the absolute final hours of creation before the fire fades. You are standing on the last embers of everything. That's pretty much the plot of the game. This looks like a world that is clinging to the edge with 2 fingers and losing its grip fast. But then you come out to the Ringed City, Gwyn's secret refuge at the end and edge of all things, and it's freaking gorgeous. Beauty at the core of annihilation. Whereas the Fountainhead Palace finds us witnessing annihilation of self at the core of beauty. If you follow any creator long enough, you'll notice certain thematic similarities carrying throughout their body of work. In the case of Miyazaki and FromSoft under his lead, there's a very prominent running theme of the mania of corruption. In the Dark Souls design works, Miyazaki discusses how grotesque and terrifying creatures should have a note of tragedy to them on a level beyond the visceral. This manifests in the world-building of FromSoft's many realms. Places like Lordran and Yharnam are once proud locales fallen to corrosion. In the Dark Souls games, the undead curse is a thing to fear, where the undead are shuttered away in asylums, hunted by gladiatorial chariots or other such cruel fates, depending on the cycle. The entire fire-linking cycle, which in itself is a corruption of the natural progression of dark to light, can be read as a desperate means of society trying in vain to preserve itself against the ever-encroaching dark. Not so in Bloodborne and Sekiro. I mentioned the mania of corruption, and that is absolutely the case in Bloodborne, where the people of Yharnam are all about that blood. They literally find blood more intoxicating than alcohol, and even prostitutes in Yharnam treat you to their blood instead of more conventional comforts. And all that blood, well, it makes you worse. Stronger, but eventually worse. Worse as in, I hope you like wolves. In Bloodborne, the further you crawl through the viscera and the grime, the more layers you peel back from the eldritch truth, the more horrifying things get. Not so in Sekiro. Here you are at the core of it all, the wellspring of the rejuvenating waters, and the contrast from what you've been through is so stark that it almost feels like another dimension from war-blighted Ashina. And it truly is refreshing. After slogging through snow and poison, the blood of his enemies, and the blood of his surrogate father, the wolf comes upon a vista of sakura trees in full blossom, of flowing waterfalls, of color and beauty. Even the boss battle against the true corrupted monk carries with it an aesthetic sensibility you just didn't get down below in Mibu Village in the dingy arena where you banished her shadow self. This battle is a joy to fight, because this bridge is a joyous place to be. When you get locked in a good groove with the monk's attacks, it's like watching a violent yet buoyant and graceful dance upon the bridge. The battle memory you get from defeating her states that her name when human was Priestess Yao. Even something as simple as knowing that she once had a name to call her own harkens back to Miyazaki's theming of reinforcing tragedy through the world details. And that carries through Fountainhead proper. Once you look past that initial stunning vista, you begin to see that things are not as they should be. For all its beauty, like a portrait reflecting better days, this is a fallen place, an accursed place. In its day, Fountainhead Palace was clearly the place to be. Those of the land below would routinely pilgrimage to be here, though the outside landscape of feudal Japan might seem exotic to our modern and Western eyes. Fountainhead really drives home just how utilitarian Ashina's military quarter really is. Even Ashina Castle, the centerpiece of Ashina dominance, is built for security rather than splendor. But at first glance, it's a bit unclear which waterlogged paths are the way they are because they've fallen into dire disrepair, as some of the underwater buildings clearly have, and which look like this because they're meant to. Let's take a look at the physical design of this area as a video game level, because mechanically there is a lot going on here. This waterlogged palace is beautiful, and you're going to want to explore it. But there are two gates of sorts keeping you from truly open-worlding this place just yet. These aren't literal gates, rather they're built into the world design itself. As you're exploring, you can only go so far a breach into the water before this warrior, overlooking the whole place and doing the tree branch power stance, shoots lightning at you with insane accuracy. Hashtag no-scope, hashtag get wrecked. Obviously, lightning plus water plus you is not going to work out in your favor. So your first goal is to get rid of that mini-boss, which will take you first through these buildings teeming with nobles and the occasional warrior. But you don't feel railroaded. It's an organic way to compel you to explore certain areas first, and you have your choice of how you go about clearing those areas. The second gate of sorts is the Great Carp, a massive carp that swims the waters and is not looking for a diving buddy. He will thrash you when you try to swim under to the other side of the palace, unless you reach the point in the palace where you can dive down and swim quickly from cover to cover. By that point, you'll have been compelled to explore much of this second area. If you're wondering how the two gates connect, it has to do with this part here where you're swimming from cover to cover away from the carp. You can't get through that area underwater without being shocked into next year by that warrior yeeting lightning at you, and you just won't have the cover to hide behind if you try to swim across the open expanse of water instead of running the palace to find a better diving point. Unless you're a speedrunner, then it's theoretically possible, but not with casual play tactics. So these obstacles serve a mechanical purpose, but the machines are hidden inside an organic framework. Everything feels natural as you progress. You don't feel like you're overcoming a developer's obstacles, you feel like you're exploring a ruined land. From the other side of the lake, you'll face a constant ascent to the Divine Dragon. Lightning crashes around you as you ascend closer to the core of it all. Fittingly, it's a gorgeous boss battle, more focused on lore than on raw challenge. I'm not going to talk too much about the Divine Dragon today, but there are several great videos out there digging into the dragon's origins and lore. Because Fountainhead ties deep into Sekiro's lore, and in that lore the waters of this palace are very much in themselves a source of corruption, as we'll explore soon. But to really contextualize that corruption, let's take a step back and get another look at how corruption of the body and mind has been explored in Miyazaki's work so far. In the Souls trilogy, corruption takes the form of rot. Undead appears zombified for lack of a better term. In Bloodborne, corruption is transformative, causing those who imbibe the blood to either regress to lycanthropy or take on bastardized traits of the celestial Great Ones. In Sekiro, corruption by way of the rejuvenating waters of the dragon's heritage is also transformative, but with imagery that invokes the nature of aquatic life. We see one of these nobles much earlier in the Hidden Forest, but much like early evidence of the Great Ones in Bloodborne, we lack the context at that point to make much of it. But these early references in these games are an important means of seeding to the source, and in Dark Souls the corruption is a widespread state. In Bloodborne the corruption has become plague, feared and venerated in equal measure, but is pretty widespread by the time the ailing hunter reaches Yharnam. In Ashina, the corruption has a central source, and the waters flowing from Fountainhead are venerated to the point where people make pilgrimages to hopefully drink from its waters. I know I'm calling back to previous games a lot, but I've talked previously about how, by and large, the Soulsborne continuum is the continuing artistic journey of its director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, and like I mentioned, we're going to see certain underlying themes sustaining themselves from work to work. Sekiro tends to view the pursuit of immortality as a corruption of the natural state, as well as a grave transgression on its own terms. Kuro is made out as heroic and noble for being willing to sacrifice himself to sever the ties of immortality that have unnaturally blighted Japan and which reside in him. Meanwhile, those who seek the blood of the divine heir do so for selfish reasons, for power or longevity, or in Genichiro's case a grossly overstretched sense of dedication to family and land. Kind of like in Dark Souls, where Gwyn immolating himself in the kiln of the first flame corrupts the natural cycle of dark overtaking light, Sekiro views the quest for physical immortality as an affront to the natural cycle of life and death. Simply put, living things are meant to die. And there's no better look at Sekiro's theme of immortality through corruption than Fountainhead Palace. Look at the Great Carp, a being that has ascended to become biologically immortal. It can be murdered, and in fact there's a whole side quest where you do exactly that, but left to its own devices, it will not die. It has succeeded in its goal and is revered like a god for it. But at the same time, just look at it. It swims around, it comes when called, and it eats precious bait, it defends its territory. Does that sound like a personality to you? That sounds like a thing just existing. Basically an animal in the most derogatory sense. This is the final form of their quest for immortality? This thing is so much lesser than humanity. We're not discussing concepts of the soul passing on to another plane of existence. We're talking about a physical survival specifically. And this thing, whatever it was before, was so desperate to cling to this plane of existence that it went all the way and lowered itself to become this thing. Fountainhead may be a wellspring, but it's a poison chalice. Just like the banquet table in Pan's Labyrinth, just like Circe's wine in the tale of Odysseus, the allure hides only self-destruction. And that brings it back to the art on display, because I think pretty much everyone will agree that Fountainhead is far and away the most beautiful location in the game. Coming from a creator like Miyazaki, who usually dwells in the tragedy of decay and the demise of times long past, Fountainhead is a revelation and a breath of fresh air, even in its rather closed-for-repairs state. But that's part of the brilliant illusion. We're drawn in just as those on the Dragon Spring pilgrimages are. This beautiful place, this gorgeous vista that brought so many players a shock just to see it after the gunge pit that is Mibu Village, draws us in so completely that we don't even stop to think that we too are on a pilgrimage of our own, drawn ever onward to this beautiful travesty, this beating heart of the corruption tearing Japan apart. A horrifying, dilapidated ruin wouldn't have worked nearly as well. Just like a moth to the flame, we pilgrimage deeper into Fountainhead as those nobles before us. Tempting, isn't it? Come, stay a while. You've come far to get here, and to get here is a relief. Partake of what is offered, for your hosts are most insistent. After all, what harm could come from a refreshing drink of water? Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.